An ever-changing presence in the Earth's sky. Bright and beautiful, it circles about our planet. It's the moon, and it's right here in your room. Before we begin, you can enjoy your moon in one of 3 viewing modes. 1, when the light level in your room goes down, a stunning full moon automatically appears. 2, select and view any phase of the moon manually by pressing the largest of the 3 buttons on your remote. And 3, watch the phases of the moon cycle automatically by pressing the medium-sized button on your remote. Imagine what people of ancient times thought of this celestial object. Was that a man's face gazing down on the Earth? Where did the dark markings come from? What made our lunar companion seem to magically change shape? The many stories created to explain the moon's appearance in the sky have been passed down over the centuries. In modern times, our fascination with the moon continues. Astronauts have brought pieces of it back to Earth. One day, in the not-so-distant future, humans may return to the moon to live and work.
10, 9, 8.
Want to learn more about the moon? Keep listening as we explore our nearest neighbor in space.
1, and lift off. Lift off.
If you drove to the moon in a car at highway speed, it would take 142 days to get there. Luckily for the Apollo astronauts who went there over 30 years ago, they had a faster way of traveling. Blasted into space on the mighty Saturn V rocket, their trip was only 66 hours long. Not bad when you realize that the moon is about 240,000 miles away from the Earth. On July 20th, 1969, the first astronauts on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, walked on its surface for 2.5 hours. That may not seem very long, but this was the first moon landing, and no one knew what to expect.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Despite their brief time on the lunar surface, the astronauts got a lot done. They set up scientific experiments and, like any good tourists, took pictures and brought back some souvenirs. The Apollo moon missions ended in 1972. By that time, 840 pounds of moon rock and soil had been collected. Astronauts gained the experience of living and working in the moon's weaker gravity, just 1/6 that of Earth's. And what did the 12 astronauts leave back on the moon? 50 tons of equipment, including 3 lunar rovers, a couple of golf balls, and footprints that will remain visible in the moon dirt for another 1,000,000 years.
How you doing? Pretty good.
Physically, the Earth and Moon resemble a double planet system. Why? Because the moon is very large, 1/4 the size of Earth. Most of the other moons in the solar system are much smaller than the planets they orbit, making the Earth and Moon unique. Scientists have wondered for centuries about the moon's origins. Did it swirl together from the debris left over from the Earth's formation? Or perhaps the moon formed somewhere else, was captured by our planet's gravitational pull as it passed by the Earth. Neither of these theories made sense after the astronauts returned home with samples from the moon. From what was learned by studying the lunar rocks, it's now believed that the moon is the result of a big splash. Scientists theorized that over 4 billion years ago, a still molten Earth and another planet, about the size of Mars, came together in a catastrophic collision. Material from both planets was thrown into space to form a ring of particles around the Earth. The moon then formed as this mixture of particles swirled together. But could there be a simpler explanation? One myth from the Seneca tribe of the northeastern United States says the wolf spirit sang the moon into the sky. And this is why all wolves howl at the moon today. One of the first things ancient peoples watching the moon would have noticed was its changing shape over the course of a month. The moon would first appear as a thin sliver of a crescent. This crescent would wax or grow from night to night until the brilliance of a full moon lit up the sky. Then the moon would wane or shrink, getting smaller, when finally it would disappear altogether. A few days later, the cycle would begin again with the reappearance of a crescent moon in the western sky at sunset. How mysterious and magical this must have seemed to people long ago. Today, we understand the moon's cycle of phases is caused by the sunlight and the moon's orbit around the Earth. Like the planets and other moons in our solar system, the moon doesn't create its own light. Just like car headlights bouncing off of bicycle safety reflectors, sunlight bounces off the surface of the moon, allowing us to see it. Half of the moon is always illuminated by the sun, but the shape that we see, or its phase, depends on where the moon is in its orbit around the Earth. The 4 basic phases of the moon are new moon, when we can't see the moon in the sky; first quarter, when the right-hand side of the moon is lit up; full moon, when the moon is at its brightest; and last quarter, when the left-hand side of the moon is illuminated. From new moon to new moon takes roughly a month, 29.5 days to complete. And this predictable cycle of phases goes on and on and on. When viewed from the surface of our planet, the sun and moon appear to be almost exactly the same size in the sky. It's just a coincidence, but this means that when the sun, moon, and Earth are lined up just right, an incredible event called an eclipse takes place. There are 2 kinds. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon passes between the Earth and the sun. The sun's light is blocked by the disk of the moon, which casts a dark, narrow shadow on the Earth. During totality, the sky gets dark, and stars and planets appear. Solar eclipses are visible from various places across the globe twice a year. A lunar eclipse takes place when the Earth passes between the sun and the moon. In this case, the Earth's shadow is cast upon the moon's surface, causing it to darken and turn a coppery color. Lunar eclipses take place 2 to 5 times a year. For primitive people who didn't understand the universe the way we do, the sun and the moon ruled their very lives. So imagine what must have gone through their minds when eclipses occurred. Was this a punishment from the gods? Was the world itself coming to an end? The stories created to try and explain these mysterious events usually involved a creature of some sort eating the sun or moon. The Chinese believed eclipses to be the work of hungry dragons, while ancient European folktales say monsters are responsible for swallowing up the sun during a solar eclipse. In many cultures, people would bang on pans and kettles. This clamorous noise was meant to frighten away any dragons, demons, or spirits that were thought to be devouring the sun or moon during an eclipse. The moon can't support life. There's no air to breathe. And temperatures on the lunar surface aren't exactly comfortable, with a sizzling daytime high of plus 273 degrees Fahrenheit and a frigid nighttime low of minus 244. Studies of the moon rocks have proven that life cannot exist on this sterile world. But the people of ancient cultures had none of this knowledge. What mattered to them was what they saw. For some, the dark markings on the face of the moon was a man, usually banished to this distant world as punishment for some crime. Among Native Americans, the frog is the most common animal visible in the moon's dark spots. One legend says the frog swallowed the moon, and the moon in turn swallowed the frog. When you look at the moon, you can see the frog sitting in its center, weaving a basket. Other cultures see a rabbit. A story from ancient Mexico said that once upon a time, the sun and moon were of equal brightness. This did not please the gods, so one of them threw a rabbit at the moon, leaving dark bruises on its face in the shape of, you guessed it, a rabbit. These bruises forever dim the moon's light. In New Guinea, the image is not that of an animal, but the fingerprints of mischievous boys. It seems the moon was kept in a jar by an old woman. The boys opened the jar and then tried unsuccessfully to grab the moon as it escaped. Early astronomers thought the dark flat spots on the moon were filled with water, so they called them maria, the Latin word for seas. Today, we know these lunar seas never contained water, but are the solid remains of huge lava flows. It was in one of these maria, the Sea of Tranquility, that the first astronauts landed their spacecraft. About 400 years ago, the Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei was the first person to look at the moon through a telescope. He discovered the moon's craters, tried to map its surface, and measure the height of its mountains. If you look at the moon through a pair of binoculars, you'll see craters scattered across the lunar surface. Most of these craters formed during an extended period around 4 billion years ago, when the planets and moons of the inner solar system were being bombarded by meteorites. Much of the moon's surface is also covered with a thick layer of fine dust and rocky debris, leftovers from the meteor impacts. Seismic equipment left on the moon's surface by the astronauts records evidence of fairly frequent moonquakes. These tremors aren't very powerful. If you were standing on the moon when one happened, you probably wouldn't feel a thing. Scientists believe moonquakes are caused by shifts in the layers of the moon and by meteorites that strike the moon's surface. Because the moon rotates on its axis once as it orbits the Earth, the same side of the moon always faces us. But even the mysterious dark side has been photographed and explored through robotic eyes. What does it look like? It is battered, covered with craters, and without large flat areas of maria. With no weather or water to erode its surface, the moon's appearance hasn't changed much over the last 3 billion years. So the next time you gaze up at the moon, remember, you're looking back in time. We take the moon for granted. It's just there, and it always has been. But what if we didn't have a moon? What if the moon didn't exist? Well, without a moon, we probably wouldn't have words like honeymoon, moonroof, or moonstruck. Farmers wouldn't harvest their crops under the light of the harvest moon. Without the moon's cycle of phases, we'd probably track time differently. While the daily rising and setting of a sun was good for marking hours and days, it was a monthly cycle of the moon that helped ancient peoples track longer periods of time. And without the moon, we Earthlings would have a much shorter day. Billions of years ago, our planet spun on its axis much faster. An Earth day was less than 10 hours long. The moon is largely responsible for the Earth's tides. And it's the pull of the moon, this ebb and flow of the tides, that has put the brakes on the Earth's daily rotation, giving us our 24-hour day. Is it time for humans to go back to the moon? If we ever want to explore Mars, then going back to the moon seems like a good idea. Beneath the lunar surface are mineral resources we might be able to mine and use for rocket fuel. Plus, we'll just need a lot more practice living and working in space before we can take the bigger steps to the red planet. Both the United States and China have said they'd like to put people back on the moon in the next 20 years. Will it happen? Only time will tell. We've come a long way in the exploration of our lunar neighbor. From the simple understanding of ancient peoples who saw the man in the moon, to viewing its surface through the eyes of powerful telescopes and space probes, and finally, to actually being there, sending 12 astronauts on a voyage through space to explore this new world. Like an old friend, the moon is just waiting for you. All you have to do is look up.